Hey there, everybody. Uh, oh, look who's here. Welcome, Ilya.
Hello, guys.
So nice to meet you.
Finally in person. Finally in person. That's a surprise.
Yeah, even for us. So I'm going to ask you to clarify something really important. Would you, for me, slowly say your name so I can learn how to pronounce your last name properly?
In Russian,
Yes.
it would sound like Ilya Ponomarev.
Okay, say it again.
Ilya Ponomarev.
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 Yes.
Okay, so I've been saying it wrong in various ways
No, it's
ever since we met.
it's actually that's what I myself was doing at the time, because I recommend just for the English speaker, it's easier to say it like Ilya Ponomarev, despite that it's
Ponomarev. So I haven't even been saying that though. I've been saying Ponomarev.
but in Russian the stress goes to the last of the word.
So say it one more time, slowly.
Ponomarev.
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 Ponomarev. So I'm not the only Westerner who's had trouble with this.
You're
Okay,
like,
so you're just
everyone.
yeah, as they say, it's like water off. I should get back up on the camera here a little bit. It's like water on the back of it. Okay, so anyway, you all heard it. You can correct me. It is what it is. So, Ilya, I want to ask you about some things in your background now that we've met and, working on the book with you. Obviously, I've learned a lot of things viewers don't know. Um, but before we go there, I just want to talk about a headline that was on CNBC earlier this morning. Ukraine's counteroffensive in Kherson gathering momentum. That's good news. UK advisor warns of nuclear risk. What's your take on the nuclear?
Well, I think that actually this is something that has been disseminated all the time by Russian propaganda itself, because they want the West to be scared. And well, you cannot just sit there and be scared, because if you will say, okay, so Russians are ready to apply the nuclear weapons, then you should have surrendered in the very first day and not waste the lives of your own people, right?
Right.
So if you are fighting, then you are fighting. You should forget about all this. And I don't think that Putin is ready to use any of the nuclear weapons. Actually, it's even against the Russian law, cares for the Russian law, but, still he has this doctrine for using of the nuclear weapons, which states explicitly that nuclear weapons can be used in one of two cases. Firstly, if somebody attacked Russia with nukes, then Russia can counter
Defensive.
with nukes. It says also explicitly that it should not be the first to use nukes. And second case, where there is an existential threat to Russian state. So the idea is that when enemy is staying by Moscow with conventional army, but okay, so next day the Russian state would perish, because with conventional army, they would capture Moscow. In this situation, you can use nuclear weapons to prevent that. But in general, in the conventional war, Russian legislation explicitly prohibits using of the nuclear weapons.
Do you know if there's any mechanism to actually stop Putin or any leader of Russia from launching a nuke? I mean, does he need literal physical permission or someone else to punch in a code or something?
Yes, and it's several staged procedures. It's Soviet tradition. It's not like in the United States. In the United States, it's a unilateral decision by the president with this
The football.
Yeah. But in Russia, firstly, there are two separate keys which has to be entered simultaneously. One is in the hands of Mr. Putin and the other is in the hands of Minister of Defense.
Do they need to be in the same room?
No, they don't need to be in the same room, but they need to both confirm the request, the order to use the nukes. And then it goes to the operator, who has to punch in the codes. And already there was example in the Soviet Union times when there was not a request from the top, but it was a false alarm that the United States supposedly used nukes on Russia. Well, it was just a false alarm. There was a mistake of the system. But by protocol, this officer was supposed to counterattack without asking anyone because no time for making decisions. And he looked at this and said, "No, I will not do it." And that nukes were not used.
When was that?
It was at the end of 70s.
Hmm.
That's it's a known story. You guys can Google it. It's the man who saved the world. It was a false alarm. It's Soviet satellites reported a missile attack from the territory of the United States, and later they learned that it was just a reflection of the sun. So it was a false alarm.
Well, that's reassuring because the sun's an irregular occurrence of our atmosphere. So one of the other things I want you to talk about, because we've talked about this on the show before, you've always believed that Putin's not going to use nukes because he doesn't want to die. So talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think so, because if you just look at how he behaves, he's sitting at this long tables, longer than the one that we are sitting at right now. And that's why, because he doesn't want to get infected from COVID.
Right.
He's the guy's paranoid in his mentality. So he doesn't behave himself like a person who is ready to die and go to heaven, how he suggested in public. Not at all.
No suicide bomb.
This is not.
Well, and in fact, we've heard, and maybe you can confirm this, I think we've all heard, when he's at an event, he drinks nothing. He eats nothing. I mean, that's he's completely isolating himself, even when he has to be in contact.
No, yeah, absolutely. So it's a special character, and it's a character which is very typical for many dictators. So we know that Hitler was the same. We know that Stalin was the same. We know many other people. Have the very highest ranks of power. They gradually growing more and more paranoid, more and more scared of his own surrounding, and the more they stick to life. So that's exactly the case with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. All right. So you and I have met. We've spent a lot of time getting to know each other, obviously. I am working with you on your book called Does Putin Have to Die? And something I've wanted to ask you about a lot over the last few months is when you were a deputy in the parliament, you represented a district in Siberia. And I'm hoping you'll tell us a little bit about your district, but also you probably know when Americans hear, or people in the West hear the word Siberia, it doesn't, we don't get warm, fuzzy feelings about it. It sounds like a scary place to us because we've heard lots of
associations.
Yeah, there's a lot of associations, So tell us about you're representing this district in Siberia, and convince us that you weren't exiled to Siberia before you were exiled, from the country itself.
No, yeah, that was my actually voluntary choice because I was born in Moscow and I moved to Siberia just myself, and because I love Siberia. Siberia, in terms of how it looks like, it's very much like Canada. A very similar climate, and when you just walk in the woods and whatever, that would be very, very much like Canada. And with the same, by the way, when climate diversity in the south of Siberia, it's very hot in the summertime. In summertime, you would normally see the 100 Fahrenheit temperature. In the wintertime, it's very cold, negative Fahrenheit. But nevertheless, it's everything in Siberia is black and white. The climate is black and white. It's very cold or very hot. The people are very much black and white, very good or bad. But usually they are very open and transparent.
Well, when you say they're good or bad, what's an example? What's an example of bad?
Bad, like again, it's Siberia originally was like Wild West in the United States. So obviously there were a lot of notorious people, mobsters,
So you would go there to get away from.
You would escape, but also these people of adventure who were coming there to make money. In the Soviet Union times, people in Siberia, they were making a lot of money legally in the Soviet system because they were constructing new cities in the very tough conditions. They were miners, they were oilers, there were gold diggers, so.
So Alaska is probably also.
Yeah, Alaska is a great example, yes,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, it's continuous, that's correct. So
Right.
look at Yakutia, Chukotka, and then Alaska. But at the same time, in Siberia, everybody knows that if you drive in the car and somebody is just waving a hand, you're supposed to stop because, next car may not drive another hour. The person may be physically dead, so you're supposed to stop and offer your help. And that's also, it's very typical for Siberian nature. Agriculture there is very strong in Siberia. So like Siberia is a place for real men, and that's what made me inspired at the time. In terms of my district, it was a great one. It was a large district. It's more or less the size of Texas. So it's almost 1,000 kilometers wide, and it's like 500 kilometers tall. So you could travel a lot within the district, and it was split half and half between urban and rural population. Ironically, me being, a very urban person coming from Moscow, obviously the largest city in Russia, still I got twice as many votes in the rural areas than in the city. And it's because I just like these people. I like to travel. I like to talk to them. I like to drink moonshine with them. And in every single village in Siberia, there would be their own different source of moonshine. And nobody's ever talking to them. They feel totally abandoned. So Siberia of modern days, it's like colony to Moscow. The main slogan of my most recent election campaign was "Stop feeding Moscow." Stop feeding Moscow.
Stop feeding Moscow.
Feeding Moscow, yeah. So think about ourselves, stop being a colony. Because in the Soviet times, Siberia was the leader of the country. It was the engine of development. It was a flagship. And in the modern days, Putin's Russia, Siberia is really a colony.
So there's a city in your district.
No,
I'm not sure how to say that in the proper text. In your district, there's a city. No longer your district, obviously. And say the name again, because
it's always my district. It's Novosibirsk.
Okay, it's always your district.
No, it's the capital of Siberia. It's the third largest city.
Well, and then I think most people will be surprised that the third largest city in Russia is.
Yes.
Yeah, because we have stigma about Siberia.
Again, the largest cities in Russia mostly are in Siberia, with the exception of Moscow and St. Pete. All other large cities is Chelyabinsk, Ekaterinburg, Omsk, Novosibirsk, Krasnoyarsk, Irkutsk. It's all Siberian cities.
My understanding is that this is like the Silicon Valley of Russia.
That's correct.
How did that come to be?
In general, the story of Novosibirsk is very typical Soviet. It's one of the most young cities, large cities, not only in Russia, but in the world. It was
young in terms of the age of the city or the age of the population?
Of the age of the city. The age of the city. Because officially it was established 120 years ago, at the end of 19th century, 125. And it's in the Guinness Book of Records as the fastest growing city of the 20th century. And the reason for this was that it's a major Siberian river of both, and there is a railroad, and it's very funny because usually traditionally you construct railroad connecting one city to another, and in this case it's a monument to Russian corruption. Russian back the age.
Is it fair to say another monument to Russian corruption?
Injustice, but probably the most visible and the most positive monument to Russian corruption. The story there was that there were two competing Siberian cities, and they were sending people to St. Petersburg, to Tsar's bureaucrats, paying bribes so that the railroad would go through their city and not through the others, because they were located in the way, so that you cannot connect them both at the same time. It's either one or another. and they were both very rich, very prosperous, and they paid so much money. So it came to the attention of Tsar himself that it's outrageous that there are these people, merchants, who are just wasting a lot of money in the capital, lobbying for the railroad to go through them. And he says, okay, so if those bastards, are spending so much money, like corrupt by bureaucrats or whatever, then the railroad will cross Op River in the third place, where nobody lives. And that's how it happened. So they were constructing a major bridge because it's a major Siberian river. It's very wide. So they were constructing the bridge, and they started a settlement. And that settlement started to grow, but major boosts happened during World War II. Because it was kind of in the middle between Germany from one side and Japan from another side. So it was like the safest place. And what was happening is that major industrial enterprises, they were relocated by the railroad. And as soon as the train was crossing Up River, they just deploying the factory in the middle of nowhere. And that's how the city actually started. The city was constructed as residential areas around those factories that were relocated from the European part of the country during World War II. And as it started to grow in 1960s under Khrushchev, they decided it would be a great idea if there would be a technology addition to those industries. Then they created a Siberian branch of Russian Academy of Sciences, Soviet Academy of Sciences at that time, obviously. And that's how this Silicon Valley has started. And again, because it's far away, it was far away from Moscow, was in the middle of nowhere. So a lot of liberated free thinkers within the science.
You would go there to get away.
Yeah,
you could
that
do
you're
your
out of attention,
Yeah.
and you can do whatever you want to do. So it appeared to be the most entrepreneurial, the most advanced, the most science-heavy location in all of the former Soviet.
How far is it from Moscow to? Say it again. Is it
Novosibirsk?
Novosibirsk.
Yeah, and that's exactly the name. Novo is new. So it's New Siberian City. That's how it reads.
Novosibirsk. Okay.
Yeah, and it's 4 hours flight. So direct distance is exactly 3,000 kilometers. But because the road is never straight, so
it's like flying from California to Texas, maybe a little further.
Little
From New York to
little further.
Salt Lake City. So
No.
not quite the distance across. But pretty close.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a long way without a lot in between.
Yeah, that's correct. And for a while, I was the most frequent flying passenger of Aeroflot because I was flying twice, was commuting twice from Moscow to Novosibirsk every week.
Yeah.
So,
wow. All right. So the other thing I want to ask you about is we've all heard the story, and of course, it's in the book as well in great detail of how you were exiled from your own country as a member of parliament. What I didn't understand until meeting you here and us talking and sharing stories is, and I hadn't thought about this, not only did that impact and change your life, it impacted and changed the lives of your staff as a deputy at the parliament as well.
Right.
So I think hearing about that would be helpful for us because it would really help us understand, the Russian system, how punishing it can be.
Yeah, it's very punitive, and in all Russian members of parliament, they are authorized to have 45 aides, 5 like staff members, which are on the payroll, and 40 which are like volunteers, but still they have the same status of parliamentary aides, which gives like not many, but certain official status. So out of this 45 people that I had, currently 23 are being prosecuted, either were sent to jail or appear to be in exile or any other forms of direct, serious oppression. I'm not saying being fired, that's for many, but like serious criminal oppression. But I think that says that I had a very good HR person.
Well, so my first question is 23 of 45, because you had a really bad sense of judgment or bad PR team and you were
Why I feel like I was cream of the cream, creme de la creme, it's like,
so they're being punished because of their relationship.
just because they were strong people,
Yeah.
I was picking up the best possible oppositionists in different Russian regions.
Mhm.
So some of them obviously worked in my home district.
Yeah.
Maybe altogether dozens, one quarter
Mhm.
for total number of my aides. They were in Novosibirsk. The rest were scattered across Russia. So I tried to identify the most interesting people
Mhm.
and the most promising and the most real and most committed, the most capable. Just recently, it happened already in March. 5 guys, including 2 of my aides in Bashkiria, that's a national republic in the center of Russia, not far from Volga River. So altogether, a group of 5, the 2 of my aides, they were sent to jail on the charges of terrorism and extremism, and right now the trial is pending. They are facing potentially 20 years in prison, and I think it will be somewhere close to that. Doing my defense of them, funding their lawyers through the Bravery Foundation that you guys are helping me to fund, and thank you very much for doing this. But that's just one of the examples of how these funds are being used.
Are the crimes that they're accused of crimes allegedly that happened since these are not crimes that date back to your times of deputy?
What they're accused of is totally irrelevant.
It's just made up.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely. What they can do, they do.
Yes.
In this particular case that we are talking about, the guy who was my former aide, he managed not so long time ago to actually get elected to the regional parliament of Bashkiria. So he was officially a member of parliament. That's why the punishment was so severe, because Russian government doesn't want to allow any officials to speak in public. Being an activist, you have a little bit more, and at least you will be punished firstly with just a large fine, but you will not be sent to jail immediately, only if you persist, several times, then. But as a member of parliament, immediately, that would be a very, very severe punishment. And the only thing that those guys have done like formally is they went out of the streets and organized a rally against the war, which was not very large. They just spoke in public against the war, and that's the result.
It's interesting. Being from the West, I find constantly as I'm talking with you, reading news, hearing other people discuss what's happening in Russia, I keep trying to filter through things through my Western centric view of how things work. And you keep reminding me, well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, in the US, there might be trumped up charges against somebody, but at some point it's going to get exposed because, we have lobbyists and we have activists and we have the media. I mean, we have all these other forces.
Most importantly, that you have the court.
And we have the court.
Yeah, there's the question. The main question in Russia is that you can show the court, the judge, the video where everything is clear what was actually happening, and the judge would say, "I haven't seen it."
Yeah,
and that's it. And this is the video. I'm showing it to you. No, I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
and that's it.
Yeah. So this is actually the last thing I wanted to ask you today. You spent a lot of time in the US as a deputy, and even before you were a deputy as a business. And now you've been out of Russia since 2014, a few years in the US and in Ukraine. As you look back on your understanding of how things worked in Russia, are there things that you think now that you've had time, space away from your country, are there things you look back and you go, oh, that's the way it works. I never understood that while I was in the fishbowl, but now I'm out of the fishbowl and I see things different.
It's an interesting question, but there are definitely certain things which were kind of revelations for me. But most of them, they are related to Ukraine, not not to Russia, but to Russia as the result of certain revelations to Ukraine. It was obviously, I am personally very much interested in history. I think that without really knowing your history, you cannot really think about your future. It was in George Orwell's book, who controls the past controls the future, controls the future controls the present, right? So that's and I totally agree with this sentiment. But what I realized being outside Russia, that the whole of Russian civilization hangs on what was happening in Kiev, some thousand years ago. Without it, it's non-existent. So we need to rethink our view of our own civilization after the collapse of the Soviet Union and after Ukraine decided to go its own way and to split. We need to rethink us. But that's a challenge. That's a very interesting thing. But in terms of the way I take Russians and their logic and their approach, probably not. There were no significant.
It's hard to surprise you when it comes.
Yeah, it's hard to surprise because as a member of parliament, I really paid a lot of attention to my constituents always. And this almost 10 years in parliament, I had a lot of public meetings and meetings with people, again, the rural areas, the real people with the deep state, deep Russians,
Yes.
not with elites, not with those who are usually politicized, whatever, but with very ordinary people. So I do think that I understand them well.
Going back to what you were saying about the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, I have to say that in working on your book, it is the section of the book. There's a lot of things in your book that just shocked me or surprised me.
Like what? Shocked? That's interesting one.
I don't know that I'm going to give away surprises. There's also a lot of things, as you've said, that made me laugh. I mean, I would just stop and
that
laugh.
was my objective.
Yes. But the section about Ukraine and the history of Russia and Ukraine, in a sense, you actually make the case that there's this upside down world that, really, it's not that Ukraine should be part of Russia. It really is that Russia should be part of Ukraine. And you make a very compelling case. And I don't know if to me, that was just completely revelatory. I think when you,
by the way, it's not just about Russia. It's right now it's one of the most popular jokes in Ukraine that after the 5 months of this war, it's not Ukraine who should join NATO. It should be NATO.
This is like a Chuck Norris.
Yes.
Right? Well, so the question I want to ask is there in history, are there other previous Soviet countries that are now independent that also, how do I even ask this? Is Ukraine unique of the breakaway nations from the Soviet Union in having that relationship, or are there other countries that really are more foundational in the creation of the Soviet Union or Russia?
Well,
am I making myself clear?
Yes, absolutely. I do think that Ukraine is unique in this regards, and not because of the Soviet Union, of the Russian Empire. It's because of how this civilization was developed. Because the Christianity was coming through Ukraine, the statehood was coming through Ukraine, the legal system was coming through Ukraine, the language was coming through Ukraine, the cuisine was coming through Ukraine. There's no Russia without Ukraine.
Yeah.
It just happened that Mongol invasion destroyed Kiev and Rus, and what was left to the north is remnants of Kiev and Rus, because they were not so interesting for Mongols because they were too far to the north, and that's how the whole thing survived. But it's a remnant of that civilization which was there at the very beginning, and that's why it's very hard to identify what the Russian is at this moment, because the Russian is a blend of Ukrainians with addition of Mongols and with addition of Scandinavians. That's what the Russian. the Russian person is. With the rest of republics, it was not like this. But anyway, there are a lot of different lessons to learn as well, because say, Finland was part of Russian Empire, Poland was part of Russian Empire. Obviously, Baltic states, they were occupied by the Soviet Union for a very long time. And when I come into, say, Riga, for me, obviously, it's a cognitive, it's aesthetical dissonance, because I cannot understand how this very German-looking place was once part of the Soviet Union. It's kind of does not fit in my picture of my country.
Yeah. So last question, and again about Ukraine. Did you come to this understanding of the history and the relationship of Russia and Ukraine before you began living in Ukraine, or did it happen as a result of being there and beginning to see things and experience things? And was it sort of a dawning realization from being in the environment?
I kind of didn't pay a lot of attention to the problem, because for me, I'm a genuine internationalist, I'm genuine leftist. So for me, I'm like genuinely committed to the idea of the right of people to self-determination.
Yes.
So obviously, I was extremely sorry when the Soviet Union collapsed. What I totally agree with Vladimir Putin with it, that it's a great geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. It is a catastrophe because it's affected a lot of people negative. But it doesn't mean that we have to recreate it, because we have to honor the right of people to self-determine and to select their own way. And that's, I felt sorry, but I respected this decision. And I was okay. So Ukrainians who wanted to split away, and I was thinking, okay, maybe at some point in future, maybe not in so distant future, we will all be part of the European Union, and we will be reunited this way. But that would be in future, and that has to be a voluntary decision of people of Ukraine and people of Russia at the same time. So I said, okay, so it's a different country. Why should I pay so much attention to it? I was just respecting their independence. But obviously, when the war started, you have to learn. You have to understand.
And when you say the war started, you mean in
2014? Yes. So you have to learn. You have to understand. You have to understand the origin of that war. You have to understand the roots of the problem. And that's when I started to learn Ukraine. And obviously, a lot of revelations were coming in.
Okay, one other thing, because you said something again that I don't quite understand. I think you said something to the effect of, and this probably shocked a lot of people watching because we're Westerners, right? You were sorry that the Soviet Union broke up because you're an internationalist. I don't understand that.
Yes, first of all, for me, again, as internationalist, my motherland is the humanity in its whole.
Okay.
So any new borders, for me, it's bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I want people to live in one borderless society where all the cultures are being respected, and all the traditions are being respected, and all the languages are being respected. But where there are no boundaries.
But I think this is where we in the West struggled with what you just said. I would have thought that under the Soviet Union, their cultures and boundaries were not being respected. And
Well, I would disagree.
Well, I'm not. I'm just telling you my perception. I'm not.
Yeah, that's a usual stereotype about the Soviet Union, and obviously, again, because there was a collapse of nationalist forces coming to power in all of those republics. Very natural. Again, it's a pendulum, which swings, and obviously goes in the opposite direction. But the reality was that it was the Bolsheviks which originally actually created all those republics. Out of unity of Russian Empire, they actually were supporting the local languages and the local culture, and the local traditions. So they created them as separate republics. They converted the United Russian Empire into a federation. So they were making a lot of steps towards that direction, not that far. And then again, there was a backlash, also pendulum swayed both ways, and it was Stalin times when it went the other direction. And in general, in the Soviet Union, there was this notion of creating is that Soviet Union is like a melting pot, like in the United States, and the objective is to create a synthetic nation of Soviets. That no Russians, no Ukrainians, no Kyrgyz, no whatever, that we all are Soviets. We're like one entity. But we understand that it didn't work that well. It worked to a certain degree, but it didn't work that well. But at the end of the day, again, speaking about like historical proportions, when what would be here after we're long time gone, 1,000 years from now, I'm sure that we will live as one state. And most likely at the end of the day, there will be some common language that people would interact with. And most likely that all the races will be mixed up. Yeah. So one question is to preserve traditions, cultures, and take all the best from everything. At the same time, just out of convenience, for sure, people would mix with each other.
All right. So I'm going to ask one more question. You can decide whether we talk about it today or next week. But in everything you said, again, as it's my bias as someone from the West, and I bet I'm not the only one here thinking this. What about communism? I can't hear the word Soviet Union without thinking about communism. And so it's hard for us to, I think part of what you're saying is we need to separate the two as two different discussions. And for us, I think they get collapsed into one thing. And so we hear Soviet Union, we think communism, and we think, oh no, that's bad. That must end.
Well, firstly, there was never any communism in the Soviet Union.
Okay.
And it was so much clear that it was technically, economically impossible. Because so communism, by Marx theory, is possible only after a certain level of progress, where is the abundance of everything. That when people do not need to work at all, they just the creators, but all the actual work, all the actual production has been done by the machines and in any reasonable quantities that you would like to, so that you don't need money because it's
because there's plenty.
Yeah, it's
like we all walk into the garden and we pick an apple.
Yeah, absolutely. You just pull and you brought whatever you want to get. So, but that requires a certain technological, advances, and so that there is no deficit anymore. Nobody is hungry on this planet and whatever. So obviously communism by the same reason is not possible in one separate country and whatever. So, so that was a utopian dream. Then it was actually Stalin who introduced the term socialism. Yes, in Marxist understanding, socialism and communism, they were synonyms. So he introduced separately socialism, which is something in between. So when money exists and whatever, but still, everybody is being justly compensated for what he is doing. But also that was not implemented in the Soviet Union. It was premature. This whole social experiment was just simply premature. And because it was premature, it resulted with a lot of violence and many tragedies. And they were absolutely inevitable. Lenin was forewarned by many Marxists that you shouldn't do it. But he wanted to, and he had the opportunity. And he managed to do it, but even Lenin, I think, realized that was a mistake. That's when he introduced his new economic policies, but they were went down by Stalin within 5 years after Lenin's death. And I think obviously that was a mistake, because if they would have been kept in place, most likely there would be no violence. It's very much like what's happening in modern day China. What Lenin was introduced at that time. So there's a lot of entrepreneurship and whatever. Just when large enterprises are being controlled by the state, but grassroots, a lot of entrepreneurial activities are being actively supported. Anyway, so I don't like Soviet Union in terms of that it was a totalitarian state. I like freedom.
Yes.
And I don't like a large state. My ideal is a small state. Marx always was speaking again. Communism is the place where there is no state, that the state by itself should outlive itself. Just it has to be logically and scientifically approached through economic development. And without such development, just because of the decree that we want to be this way,
Yes.
it would create just the blood.
How does capitalism fit into all that?
It does not fit. It's the capitalism is formation of today. Capitalism is the formation which is imminent to industrialism. Industrialism means capitalism, but post-industrial world would bring this new formation again, and we see it currently appearing in front of our eyes when there are no more hierarchies, when there is all this network interaction between people, when there are new forms of state, new forms of doing business, new forms of living. The whole understanding of private property is being changed in the modern world, because you no longer need to own something. You can rent it, you can borrow something. You just have a possession of something, but it doesn't mean that you need to own this thing.
Yes.
So to make your capital froze. So it's a totally different world, and it's evolving, and it's normal. And that's exactly what Marx and Engels were predicting. It's just that you don't need to rush, don't need to do it with a force. It's a logical evolutionary process of humanity.
So some of that must be ego. I need to rush because I'm going to die.
Yeah, absolutely. Life is short. People want to be part of the history books, and that's what they are doing. What 20th century capitalism was the right way to do things. It was not ideal. No formation is ideal, and the next formation would not be ideal, and the formation after next would not be ideal. But every time it would be a step forward, and we just need to let it grow and let it emerge in front of our eyes.
You said something about new forms of things, including new forms of states that exist. I think you said exist today. Give us an example of a new form of a state that exists today.
If we look examples, say, of Switzerland, let's say a state which is very much based on the direct democracy, because it's a state with a permanent referendum. All important issues are being decided by the people. There are a lot of regional examples of participative democracy, like, for example, Porto Alegre in Brazil, and then generally PT, Party of Labor in Brazil, was evolving from the participatory democracy thing, and that allowed Brazil to make a huge breakthrough recent 20 years. Brazil was nowhere 20 years ago. Right now, it's better than Russia in terms of its position in the global economy, and that's the example of this approach. And yeah, I can bring a lot of different examples of this emerging new practice, but it's also a lot of backlash. It's a lot of struggle because obviously the elites of the past, they don't like it.
Well, and in fact, okay, this really is my last question. I'm sure you think all the time about if you have the conversation we just had with a lot of people, you're going to either scare the hell out of them or shut them down. So how do you manage that in your professional life?
Well, again, there are two different things. As I am saying, there is an evolutionary process. It's not something that we should or should not do. The sun rises, the sun sets. We can speak about this, we can keep silent about it, we can admire it, or we can complain about it, but it would still
Keep
go
happening.
up or keep go down. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, the political process. So there would be people who would be interested in studying how the sun goes up.
Yes.
Limited circle. And that's the circle I need to communicate with, because then we can, next time it would be 2 degrees to the west, so we may create something which would make us better positioned, because we know and all the others, they don't understand this yet. And that's what we are talking in this limited circle of people. But at the end of the day, my job as a politician to make sure that there would be no problems for ordinary people because they don't want to talk about this. They just want to live normally. They want to have quality education. They want to have good food. They want to drive the normal roads. They should have jobs. They should receive normal salaries. They should enjoy life, have kids, grow them up and everything. That relates on how well the state works. And so to get rid of all the parasites, which are trying to steal money, which could be used for this education and for kids and for everything. That's my job.
Yeah. All right, let's leave it there. It was a hell of a conversation. That I didn't necessarily know was coming. Yes, yes, we'll have to meet every Thursday somewhere.
Yes.
All right.
Come to Ukraine.
Yes. Well, there you go. I have an invitation. I'm going to take you up on that. Thanks everybody for joining us. Ilya mentioned at one point in there, the Bravery Foundation. Obviously, we've talked about this before. Let me see. Mouse, I probably Grace. But the Bravery Foundation is an organization that Ilya's created to, as he said, help people who are being oppressed in Russia, sometimes by extracting them, sometimes by paying their legal bills. But in many cases during this conflict, or the invasion by Russia, these are people who their jobs require them to support the war. They're part of the government or the military or the propaganda machinery, and they don't support the war. So they're trapped in these jobs. And what the Bravery Foundation does is enable them to quit their jobs, and they can then do so knowing that at least their legal bills will be covered. And in some cases, you actually remove them from the country.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just put a link in the chat there. First of all, when we end the show, you're going to see this pay button, I think. Don't have a mouse, so anything you can give will go a long way. Thank you. I think, is it Cindy Tolman? I think. Thank you for paying for the show. Any amount, even $2, will go a long way towards helping. But if you click that link, it's also I'm trying to turn that off, a landing page that you can share with your friends and family. So they don't have to be here for the show to support the Bravery Foundation. You can click that link, copy it, share it with your friends and family. And with that, I'm going to wrap things up, Ilya. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I can't tell you all what a pleasure it is to spend some time with Ilya. If you ever get the chance, don't pass. Make sure you meet him if the chance arrives. I'll see you next week on Wednesday with Thomas Nadrowski. Next Thursday with Ilya. Who knows where you'll be? Knows where I'll be.
Thursday, yes.
Oh, maybe you do know where you're going. Yeah. Maybe I'll be there with you. But thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.